Welcome to the Tuesday Night's Triumph Over Targeting podcast, and I'm your moderator, Ella. And tonight we have one of our favorite activists, Spencer Carter. He'll be talking here soon, but if you're new to the call, I just wanted to let you know that you can stay on, and we will get you some additional support, some additional TalkShoe podcast numbers, and some helpful links and websites. This is a solutions and educational-based podcast, but the views and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own personal views and opinions. My goal is that everyone can obtain something out of tonight, especially feeling of empowerment. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, or especially if you're in need of some additional support, please don't hesitate to email me at angel2016@gmail.com. So Spencer's going to be speaking for a while, and then when we get to the questions and answers of the interview, you can star 8, and when it's your turn, I will come to you, and you will hear a notification that you're being unmuted. So that's a prompt to let you know. And at that point, you will be able to ask your question, and then I will meet you after your question is completed. And if at any point in the call you're unmuted and you would like to mute yourself, have background noise or whatever the case may be, just star 6 to mute yourself, and then star 6 to unmute yourself. So a little bit about Spencer. So Spencer will be talking about his recent trip to the National Radio Quiet Zone in West Virginia. The NRQZ is a large area of land in which electromagnetic emissions are greatly restricted, especially as you approach the radio telescopes of Green Bank, West Virginia, and the NSA Eavesdropping Operations Center of Sugar Grove, West Virginia. Spencer spent over a week hiking and camping in the Green Bank area, and the area is remote, but the good news is that he found places where his targeting diminished or disappeared. So he's here tonight to discuss the details, and we welcome him. And thanks, Spencer. It's nice to have you back on the call, and I'm glad you had such a nice experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me out. I'm glad to share the details of the trip. It was a nice relief for the most part, although, the targeting's back, but it kind of seemed like they had to recalibrate some of their systems now that I'm back in the urban area of Texas again. So I just, I want to tell people about this quiet zone because it's a pretty incredible place. Even from a non-TI perspective, the telescopes, which is one of the primary reasons of the quiet zone, as you mentioned in the intro, the Green Bank telescopes are pretty incredible. They offer a tour of the facility, and they have a nice, walking map as well. And you really start to notice that the toolkits that the perpetrators have, they get limited. It seems like the deeper you get into the quiet zone. So I found that it diminished, the most when I was hiking nearest to the telescopes. Has anyone, or have you heard any other TIs talk about the quiet zone, the National Radio Quiet Zone?
No, I've never heard of it. I've never even heard of it ever. I'm here on the West Coast, and I hadn't heard of it. How did you come to find it, and how did you hear about it? I'm just curious. I wanted to backtrack a little bit and figure out how you got it.
I talked about it for a minute or two on Derek's recorded call. Well, not a minute or two. Actually, it stretched down. I wanted to get on and talk about it a minute or two, but, it stretched down for a while, and this was on Saturday, and some of them had heard of it. I guess Derek, who's been in the community for a while, has heard of it, but he's been a TI activist for who knows how long, 10 years, I think. But, most people hadn't. So, I just wanted to give some background. I found out about it when a few links of TI friends on Facebook were going around, and they were talking about this town in Sugar Grove that was this self-sustained community in Sugar Grove, West Virginia, that operated under the Navy and the NSA as kind of an eavesdropping operation. And they were shutting it down and putting it up for sale back in 2015. And that's and it, the listing, that a couple TIs posted on their Facebook feed said it was in the middle of this place called the National Radio Quiet Zone, where electromagnetic emissions are heavily restricted. And so that immediately caught my eye. There were some jokes about, hey, we should pool our money and buy this town. I think it ended up selling for a few $1 million. So I don't know how far we would have gotten with that. But, I kept the National Radio Quiet Zone in the back of my mind. And, I had an opportunity to, take a break, these past few weeks and just, make the haul up to West Virginia. I've been kind of battered with electromagnetic weapon torture these past couple of months due to my activism and the class action lawsuit that I'm organizing. And, it's good in the sense that, when they torture you hard, it means you're doing something effective sometimes. And but on the downside, it stymies your progress. So I just needed a break, and I usually will just go camping every now and then, once or twice a year, in state parks or national parks near me, or national forests. I was in Boy Scouts for a while, but I didn't make it an Eagle Scout or anything. I switched to sports, but I kind of reignited my interest in the subject due to the fact that I was just trying out different ways to escape the electromagnetic torture. And I found that I get relief in the wilderness. The perps have a toolkit ranging from, just pain to V2K to artificial images, artificial dreams. Those can be the worst, just because they use all this like Pavlovian conditioning just to try to break you down, or to artificial emotions and just operant conditioning, where they're constantly trying to just carry out these conditioning techniques on you like it's an enslavement program. Just straight out of MK Ultra, but it's done remotely now. This is kind of the evolution and illegal continuation of MK Ultra. The experiments transformed into crimes a long time ago. So they have a range of tools they can use on you, and it's pretty ubiquitous these days. But, I would get a little relief in the wilderness, but, they would do this crazy thing. Military jets would start flying over 24/7 whenever I'm out in like a remote wilderness area hiking and camping. And it's just bizarre. That seems to be when the targeting comes back up, and then I'll start finding these little cues on the trail that have subjective meaning to me, or some like trigger word they were drilling into me and I didn't know what it mean. They'd say something like onion to me over and over again. And then I'd come across an onion on the trail. And, that's the last thing a backpacker would take in the wilderness. It's low nutritional value. It's fresh onion just sitting in the middle of the trail. Who put it there, and why? And why would you bring that out in the woods? Or, I was talking to a buddy about a tarp I had and wishing I'd brought it because I just had a lightweight version of, a water protector. And, I'd come across a tarp like a couple hours later that looks exactly like mine, that had no debris on it, like someone left it there. It was abandoned, and we'd hike back by the same spot a few hours later and it'd still be sitting there just abandoned right on the trail, but brand new and like fresh with no leaves on top of it, debris, like someone just put it there. And this is the kind of stuff that starts happening once the jets fly over. And I found something similar in the quiet zone. I went to this area in the wilderness, probably about 20 miles from Green Bank.
Get there.
And
did you fly there, drive, or how did you get there?
I drove up there. It's pretty remote. Most airports, I talked to some locals, and I heard that there's an airport in Lewisburg, West Virginia, but it's a regional airport. I think Roanoke, Virginia has an international airport with regular flights, and Washington, D.C., and those are about 2 to 3, or those are closer to 3 hours away. There's Lewisburg, West Virginia, or there's Washington, D.C., and Roanoke, Virginia, but you'd have to rent a car if you went there. Lewisburg might be an option if they fly to your airport, Lewisburg, West Virginia. It's near the Greenbrier Resort, which is kind of a well-known resort on the East Coast. It's pretty cool. This old building that's got like an underground Cold War bunker where all the elites could go to an underground. I don't know what all was in it back in the day, but anyways, the closest town to Greenbank that has, like, Greenbank was West Virginia, where the National Radio Astronomy Observatory is located, and is in Greenbank, West Virginia, and its population is less than 200. The closest town with lodging, I'd say, is Cass, West Virginia. I believe that's about 10 miles away. And the closest town with lodging and a couple of restaurants where you see kind of, somewhat of a community, maybe a few thousand, is Marlinton. So those are your closest contacts to civilization. If you want to get to a big city, I'd say Charlottesville, Virginia, where the University of Virginia is located, is the closest option, about 3 hours away. There's some medium-sized towns like Lewisburg that are within about an hour, I believe, of the Greenbank telescopes. The radio quiet zone is huge. It covers, all these towns, and it covers the western half of Charlottesville, West Virginia. I think it's like 150 miles by 100 miles, so something like 15,000 square miles. Wikipedia has a good, quick overview. It's pretty factual. It's hard to be unfactual. It just, states the stats on the place, and it's it's remote, but you can get there, and it's beautiful. In the summertime, it's beautiful. I hear in the fall, spring, it's beautiful. It's just 70 during the day and 60 at night. So it's a good time of the year to go. I mentioned the wilderness camping. So, I found it diminished, but then it picked up a little bit, the targeting, once I started getting the 24/7 continuous jet flyovers. And, those are always weird. I don't understand why those happen wherever I go camping. I asked a visitor guide in the quiet zone, and she said, this is like official tourism guide. She said the jet flyovers are due to military drills. They come up to West Virginia because it resembles Afghanistan, the mountains or something. And, I've got a lot of buddies deployed to Afghanistan, and, they call it the rock farm. And, there's not a tree in the country. And West Virginia is covered with trees. So that didn't make much sense to me, and there's another military guy in this bed and breakfast I went to afterwards, where I was kind of decompressing after being in the woods for a couple of days, just to kind of get a warm shower. And he just kind of out of unprovoked, I mentioned the jets to him, but he went into how they're testing their ground probing radar. It was kind of weird. We have our little gang stalker encounters, and, whether he was saying it intentionally or unintentionally, who knows. But, so I've got a lot of confirmation that the military regularly runs flyover drills in the area, and they seem to follow me wherever I am. I guess, most of our country looks like Afghanistan because these jet drills, just go on constantly. And I guess it's not too hard to believe,
we've got a pretty big military-industrial complex, and their budgets are in the hundreds of billions. So, just a couple thousand are left in Afghanistan, so they got to do something when they're back here. So I don't think the bulk of the members of the military are corrupt or know what's going on, but, there's definitely some bad apples at the top that are running this program, and they're very clever and sly. So, like all organizations, you get your bad apples. And, we've got about 5 million people in this country with security clearances. If just 10% of those are corrupt, or just 5% corrupt, you've got an army of 250,000 people that can organize and run this, silent holocaust against TIs. And, for every outspoken TI, I'd say there's probably 10 people knowingly or unknowingly being tortured with these weapons. So it's kind of a Soviet-style purge, in my opinion. But back to the quiet zone. I gained some relief in the wilderness. The jet flyovers increased, and some, little gang stalking increased, even out in this wilderness area in the middle of nowhere, this national forest in the mountains, where no motor vehicles are allowed. The park rangers aren't even allowed to bring motor vehicles in. If they want to do work on trails, they have to bring horses in. So, but unfortunately, you have jet traffic fly over. So I say to myself, you know what? Why don't I look at this map and find a place where the airspace is restricted? And before I went out into the wilderness, I took a tour of the Green Bay Telescope facility. And it's incredible. It's in this basin that's probably a couple square miles that's nestled between two mountain ridges, just to kind of reduce the radio interference even more. And, they're radio telescopes, so they're studying our universe in the spectrum outside of the visible light spectrum. Our eyes can just see a small portion of the electromagnetic spectrum. So these radio telescopes are picking up, all sorts of frequencies. I believe the wavelengths from 3 meters to 3 millimeters, which would correspond to 100 megahertz to 100 gigahertz. That could be just for one of the telescopes. I believe there's 8 telescopes in total, and a lot of these scopes are the size of a football field. They're kind of, most well-known landmark is the what they call the Senator Byrd telescope, which is the largest movable radio telescope on Earth. It's the size of, just picture a satellite dish that's the size of 2 football fields. It's an incredible sight. But, it's like a football stadium suspended on a platform with a reflector and a receiver, and it's movable. It's incredible. Just imagine if the satellite dish and some of the homes in your neighborhood were the size of 2 football fields. So it was great taking the tour, and the tour guide mentioned to me that they have restricted flight paths over the telescope area because, the navigation equipment and the radar equipment in airplanes can cause interference with the telescopes. So even military jets have to get advanced clearance, and it's a hassle, and, it takes time, and I guess it would raise red flags if they just started doing drills over the radio telescope base. And it's already weird enough that they're running these drills over the wilderness in West Virginia that looks nothing like Afghanistan did with trees. And the military guy I talked to said they come out of a base in South Carolina. So, there's, 400 miles of Appalachian Mountains from Tennessee up to Pennsylvania almost, where they could do their test flights. I don't know why they'd go to this remote area in West Virginia, especially a wilderness area. That's like, I don't know, there's got to be another, I'd say, thousands and thousands of square miles of space they could fly over a lot closer to their bases. So that's unusual, but, it is what it is. So I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to go hike up in the mountains next to the telescopes. And, the telescopes are in a big basin, and they've got mountains on each side. And I went up in the mountains west of the telescopes, and thankfully it's pretty much all national forest land up there. And national forest land is nice because you don't need any permits or anything. You can hike in and you can camp in any place for 2 weeks. And, the hike wasn't that bad. It's about a 2-mile hike, and the trails kind of wind up the hills. And you can go out of towns called Wanless or, Hosterman, I believe was the other town. And you can hike up on the western ridge of the Green Bank telescopes, and you are on what's called the Allegheny Trail, and you can actually see the telescopes from up there. So, as we approached this ridge, I got kind of this dizzying relief at first. And then, just for the first time in 3 years, all the targeting went away, all the magnetic pressure, all the pain, the torture, the V2K, the Pavlovian conditioning, it just disappeared. And it was like an emotional moment. I was hiking with a buddy, and I told him he's not a TI. I'd like to, I was fortunate to have someone else willing to go. He's a relative too, so I could trust him, but that's not necessary really. It's kind of a friendly community, a nice area, but it's always good to travel with people. I just like to be safe like that, just as a TI, because we get so many break-ins and whatnot. It seems they have to be more careful if you have witnesses around, even if the other person's a TI. But thankfully, my relative wasn't. So I told him, this is incredible, and I almost started crying. It was just emotional. So, the downside is that was towards the end of the trip. I'd already, been out in the wilderness areas. I'd already been in cabins, just kind of testing out the radio zone, learning about it. There's 5 different zones of restrictiveness in the National Radio Quiet Zone. Like, say, if you got into western Charlottesville, Virginia, which is 3 hours away, you'd be in Zone 5. It's the least restrictive. But you still have to get permits if you're setting up high-powered transmitters. And then it goes down to Zone 4 and Zone 3, which might be in some of the surrounding towns that are within several miles, maybe Cass, maybe Marlinton, West Virginia. And then Zone 2 is like the visitor facilities where you leave your car and you check in and you pay your $6 for the tour and you sit down and get a presentation before the tour. And Zone 1 is actually near the telescopes. So it's weird. I didn't really get out and walk the grounds because we got out briefly of the van to take a quick picture, but it started raining right when I was taking my tour. We were planning on walking the grounds. They let you hike the grounds, which is nice because each individual telescope is surrounded by a fence, so they don't care if you, as long as you don't go in the fences where the telescope control or receiver rooms are, then you're fine. The control rooms are back in Zone 2. They can control the telescopes via fiber optic, and actually some of the telescopes are controlled by like universities, like that are far, far away, just through fiber optic transmissions or relays. Unfortunately, it rained when I was on the Zone 1 part of the grounds. So, but when I went on my hiking trip, after staying in some cabins and then camping out in the wilderness a couple nights, I went on a day trip up there because it was kind of the end of it. And, that's when I can truly say the targeting disappeared completely. And it was great. And I came back just looking healthier, feeling better. It was nice. And it seemed like they kind of had to start recalibrating all the loaded terminology they're constantly drilling into you. They kind of recalibrate, just popping up these signs and symbols that they associated with terrorizing events in the past, trigger words, trigger signs. They use colors and numerology a lot, it seems like. So people would come around me with these thing zone, and it seems like they were recalibrating their system a while, and it wasn't as effective. But, they can, crank up the pain and the sleep deprivation pretty much any time on anyone without doing the remote neural monitoring. If your location's being tracked, which is quite easy, you read about, some of the technology back in the 50s or 60s from a guy like Ben Rich and Lockheed Skunk Works, his autobiography, and a quote from him is, we could track a baseball from 5,000 miles away. So, once you have someone's position, I think, because this technology is so ubiquitous, is in your automobiles, Samsung TVs, appliances, possibly, and utility grid. And you look into lasers, and you study the microelectronics revolution. You realize that these devices can be as small as salt grains. They can hide them anywhere, and people are astounded that they wouldn't be detected. But who's really auditing them? And you look at the statistics of the number of radio frequency engineers in this country, and it's just a small percentage, well under 1%. And my response is try to get someone to audit your electronics, to deconstruct them, and make a YouTube video about them, or try to get them to call the city and say they want to go through all the components in a cell phone tower, or call the car makers and say they want to go through all the components. And you're looking for a salt grain size component. And if these people, have the background to know how to detect this stuff, they likely, know what it's capable of and know what these people do. So, but it's different from us. We aren't really blowing the whistle. We're fighting for our lives, and we're fighting for the rest of humanity. Because statistics show that the number of victims are increasing exponentially. I think there's data from FFCHS surveys about when your targeting started, and it really just started just skyrocketing after 9/11, when budgets went up and oversight went down. So it's not the whole government. It's not an official operation. It's a black ops operation. It's criminal elements in the deep state, which is kind of the modern term for the military-industrial complex in our post-industrial society. It's when you get away from all that stuff in the wilderness, it's nice, but they can. Easier for them to they can still do flyovers. I found that basically getting on this Allegheny Trail west of the Green Bank telescopes, did the trick. And it's just a hiking trail, but it's a national forest, so you can camp there, for 2 weeks at a time, and then you have to move locations, I think. So you could probably just move 200 feet. You have to be 200 feet off the trail, but move like 200 feet, and you get a new spot. So I plan to go back and do that, I think, because the targeting's just gotten so bad since I've been back. I kind of want to open up an office in a nearby city and just go up to, that's within like an hour or two's drive of the quiet zone, or maybe in Marlinton. That's a decent enough city. That's close to everything. If the targeting gets bad while I'm pursuing my activism, I have that, hiking trail to escape to, or I have the wilderness to escape to where it's diminished, I don't think they could keep up those 24/7 flyovers, for longer than a week or two. So, that's always an option. And, the sure bet is hiking right next to the radio telescopes. Just get away from electronics, get away from, everything. Any place where some, a small device could be embedded, targeted individuals, realize that, you listen to Brian too, or a lot of people who've traveled, they can be pretty resourceful. They can get you on planes. They can get you, driving, cross country on the interstate, but you're right there. You're surrounded by, so many different electromagnetic devices in the grid usually, and, cell phone towers, and, the possibilities are almost endless on where and how these devices can be embedded, and no official bodies investigating them or So, they're getting away with it right now. But, I gave this tour really kind of gave me insight on what needs to be done and what law enforcement should and can do to end this program basically overnight, because once you expose it in one place, it has to be exposed everywhere else because a precedent's set. So, and you know how you do that? A spectrum analyzer. That's all that has to be done. All these hundreds of thousands of torture victims with electromagnetic weapons that have been around for decades. I've got, peer-reviewed studies talking about, just the deep state's investigation into electromagnetic radiation and how it can affect humans going back to the 60s. And I've got, more kind of evidence that it could, these devices might even been used, far earlier, like when, radio was being invented and they were tuning it to different frequencies and they realized that certain frequencies caused pain or interfered with their biological systems. So, this is well-established science. There's hundreds of peer-reviewed articles from the military and civilian scientists going back decades. And, the one way to get an empirical measurement is a spectrum analyzer. And it's been this country's number one goal for the past 16 years to, make the fighting of terrorism our number one priority. And we've spent trillions upon trillions doing that. The Department of Defense alone gets, $550 billion every year. And, all the spy agencies and federal law enforcement agencies, they get, tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions more. So a spectrum analyzer that costs a few $1,000 and an engineer that knows how to work it, and we're trying to figure that out. I'm trying to teach myself how to work them. But, it's like teaching yourself to fly a plane. You can do it, but you've got to, read and you've got to study and you've got to learn how all the controls work and how to interpret them. So it's something that law enforcement, it's well within their budgets, all the millions of members and all the trillions of dollars they've gotten over the past decade and the hundreds of billions they get every year. That's all they have to do. They just have to say, hey, the medical bodies say these weapons cause these problems. All these scientific studies say these weapons cause these problems. And, that's just run a spectrum analyzer. That's all you've got to do, Look at a site like biggerthansnowden.com. All these people that are being tortured are NSA veterans, they're military veterans, they're doctors, they're lawyers. They're good people who have helped their community and, helped their country, served their country for decades. That's the least they deserve, But it's just this kind of atrocity that's happening in America. And it'd be so simple to end. And there's no, just or rational reason to it other than the fact that, there's not enough widespread knowledge of this technology because it really came about in the past generation. And, less than 1% of the population has a career in physics and electromagnetism or radio frequency engineering. So there's just not enough democratic, pressure to get these agencies to act. I think, the majority of members in our government are admirable, but, they take their orders from guidelines handed down from the top, and that's where, a lot of criminal elements have entrenched themselves, it appears. And, that's it's not in the manual that they can do this. And, so there have been exceptions, like FBI agent who was the chief of the Southern California FBI, Ted Gunderson, who has commendations from a couple of presidents, Ford, Reagan, I think. He was an incredible guy, and he took up the cause of PIs before he passed away in his 80s back in 2011. And, so there's a few exceptions, but they, and there's a lot of credible whistleblowers out there, but, they just get ignored by the corporate billionaire media, and that's that. That's what defines people consensus reality. And unfortunately, it's just a fact of human nature. Lister back in the late 1800s when he was telling doctors that there's this invisible pathogen, basically, called bacteria that's making people sick when you don't sterilize your surgical tools. It took 20 years for that to sink in with the medical community. And he was ridiculed because doctors, they would keep the same bloody frock and the same bloody tools and use them on, countless people because they saw it as a badge of honor. The more caked on blood they had on their surgical gear, they wouldn't dream of sterilizing or washing it. And, it's just, you could give more recent examples, the civil rights movement, how many citizens were deprived of their basic rights for decades until they, gained exposure on color television when it came about. There's, big tobacco. Doctors said cigarettes were good for you back in the 40s. It took, a lot of time and a lot of litigation to, make the public realize, cigarettes can give you cancer. You shouldn't use them. You've been lied to. To asbestos, 500,000 people died from asbestos before it finally got restricted because there are just so many just powerful people that made a lot of money off of it. And it just took, you had Paul Berdua on your program a few months ago, and he was one of the journalists that, got ridiculed and threatened and bribed and all sorts of stuff just to stop writing about asbestos. But, he finally succeeded after years or decades and got it banned. And so we can't really get discouraged. That's what they want us to do. They want us to think that things will never change. They want us scared. They want us isolated. They want us to forget the First Amendment. That's the most important thing. You can't get locked up for talking about this stuff. You can get locked up for saying you're going to hurt yourself or someone else, which I hope no one here would ever do or ever think about doing, because peaceful legal activism is how we're going to end this. But, if they locked up people for having an opinion they didn't share or a facts that they weren't aware of, they would have to lock up every single religious minority in this country because, all the religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, those, they don't have empirical proof for any of that. I'm a Christian myself, so I'm not knocking religion. I'm saying, that's why we have a First Amendment, because you can have beliefs and you can speak about those beliefs. The TI issue is no different. There's a lot of disinformation out there saying don't talk about this stuff. But no, you gotta be saying you're going to hurt yourself or someone else. So, we can't be scared. You just got to remember that, these kinds of atrocities pop up in history. I gave the examples of bacteria to civil rights, asbestos to tobacco, Bernie Madoff a few years ago. Everyone in New York would have said he was the best money manager around, but there are whistleblowers contacting the SEC for years saying this guy's running a Ponzi scheme. And finally they investigated and shut him down. But, it just shows how, extraordinary popular delusions and the madness of crowds can sometimes define consensus reality for people. So this tour guide, she was a nice young lady, very smart, but in the introductory speech before we got on the van to take the tour of the grounds, guess what she pulled out? She pulled out a Faraday cage and a spectrum analyzer. And she wanted to, the purpose of it was to demonstrate the electromagnetism that can be given off by cell phones, by your key fobs and your that operate your car, by just digital electronics in general when they're powered on. You can't take digital cameras down into the Zone 1 area. You can't take gasoline-powered vehicles because they all emit electromagnetism. And she pulled out this Faraday cage of a spectrum analyzer to just show us the frequencies and power levels of these devices. Now, you're obviously going to need a bigger version of that to test the environment of a TI, but it's the same concept, and you could probably even use the same spectrum analyzer she was using. It looked like a pretty high-tech one. There's a lot of, very advanced engineers stationed at the facility that, probably trained her in it and helped her set it up. But, she's a tour guide. She was doing it as a summer job. I believe she was still an undergraduate. So, if this little tour guide can run a spectrum analyzer dozens of times a day, why can't, our law enforcement agencies just do that once? Prove us wrong. Come and, properly do it. Look at the scientific studies that show what frequencies, what modulations, what power levels can cause these symptoms in humans. It's been well established for half a century at least. And run a spectrum analyzer and see if that's happening. That's all you have to do. But that word just doesn't exist in the popular lexicon. And we need to change that because it's a simple solution. And once they prove it with one person, which they've never done, and it's so simple, the tour guide can do it 6 times a day, then this tyranny, this silent Holocaust is over. And, that's one area of activism I'm pursuing, is to get either the law enforcement bodies to provide a spectrum analysis or to learn how to do it myself, like Jesse Beltran basically did. So anyways, that's kind of the summary of the tour of the radio facility. I thought it was really interesting that the tour guide was running a spectrum analyzer to kind of demonstrate electromagnetism to the public, not for the purpose of scanning the room and seeing what TIs were experiencing. Just she would isolate an electronic device in a copper mesh Faraday cage without even closing it completely. She just put her hand in it and hold the device, and the spectrum analysis probe was, tied into the little box. So, it's something that's well within the budgets and capabilities of, at least our federal and if not local law enforcement agencies. And there's just no excuse. These victims, they've served our country. There's hundreds of thousands of them. It's the number one goal in this country to fight terrorism, and this is domestic terrorism. We're all being terrorized. And it's very easy. Run a spectrum analysis on us. It costs a few $1,000. You get hundreds of billions a year. Why wouldn't you do this? These are the salt of the earth. These are good people. They're all, the vast majority, have served our country and our communities. And so that was a takeaway, and I kind of already knew about spectrum analyzers before, but it was interesting to see it in action. And, the other takeaway was, discovering the Allegheny Trail, either out of, you go to Cass, and it's an old historic town. You can find some lodging. And a few miles up the State Highway 1 from Cass, you'll come to a town called Wanlis or Hosterman. And you can find a little parking spot near the trailhead in both. And it'll take you up to the Allegheny Trail and just get away. Once you get a few miles up there, get away from the power grid, and, there's no other electronics up there. It's a restricted flight path. You're basically on the border of Zone 2, and you might even be in Zone 1 at that point. So it's the most restrictive area of the quiet zone, and your targeting will disappear. You got to camp if you want to stay up there, but you could probably get lodging a few miles away, hike up there. So, that was a great find, and I hope, anyone that's struggling, that can afford to travel a little bit. It's not too expensive. You got gas to get there and some camping, and you might want to get a hotel room. Marlinton and Cass are good cities, every now and then just to kind of take a warm shower. But, if you're being battered by these criminal elements in the deep state, I'd highly recommend a trip to the area. Just the hiking and the exercise alone is good for you. It's, kind of an intermediate trail. It's not too steep. It kind of winds its way up, the Allegheny Mountain or the Appalachian Mountain. It's, they aren't big mountains like the Rockies. I think the elevation only gets up to about 4,000 feet around the telescopes, and you're starting out at like 3,000 feet. So it's not too bad. And so that was nice. That was really nice when I got relief from the targeting. after, trying out a couple locations. It diminished a little in the wilderness, which was nice. But, once I hiked that trail next to the radio telescopes where the flight paths were restricted, it went away. So I plan to go back, and I might even open an office in one of the nearby towns. So I'll keep people updated on that. I've got a lot of activism plans, big and small. I'd say the biggest is the class action lawsuit. I get battered when I work on it, so it's taking a little longer to organize all the data and everything to serve it up to, not only my personal attorney, but the attorneys I've talked to that I'm trying to get to form a joint venture on contingency. So I need to have, all the data organized, and I got a nice executive summary, a kind of a case outline for them that I'm wrapping up. And so I'm, I just want to, make them comfortable doing it on contingency, because I know a lot of PIs don't have a lot of financial means due to the targeting keeping them out of work. So I think the lawsuit's the number one goal. But while I'm doing that, I'm also looking into detection, shielding, and all the way down to Twitter campaigns. Tomorrow, June 28th, we're having a coordinated Twitter outreach campaign to Ivanka Trump with the hashtag pound targeted individuals. I've found that when you all send a tweet to a person on the same day with the same hashtag, just any time during the day tomorrow, take 1 minute, and it's effective because it gains more prominence in Twitter's algorithms, and the person you're trying to reach out to is much more likely to get the message when it's coming from hundreds of people. And we've, got a lot of attention in past campaigns. The last one was to new media journalist Alex Jones, and the first one was to Donald Trump. And just the more they see these terms and the more they hear about it, the less likely they are to be ignorant about it or to be able to ignore it going forward. So that's that's the activism campaign we have going tomorrow. So I urge everyone listening to take part in that. You can find out more on the Meetup site at meetup.com/TI-awareness. So that kind of wraps up the summary. I'd love to take some questions.
I guess, thank you, Spencer. I really appreciate it. And it was really great to hear you talk about what you experienced when you first kind of had some sense of relief. That's really very inspiring to hear. I'm so glad you were able to have that moment of some kind of reprieve and some kind of relief. So that was very good news. I guess my question is, maybe you can tell me some more of the cons. What concerns might you have if you were a woman out there by yourself? Would you still feel basically safe? At what points did you feel vulnerable? And what did you do to counter that?
I got some break-ins at the cabin I was staying in, and when I was in the wilderness, I didn't get any break-ins or anything. Right. But, like I said, they started leaving the second day I was out there. Someone was leaving these, subjective signs, which is kind of their methodology. If anyone's experienced organized stalking or contract stalking or Zersetzung, these are well-established repression tactics. I mean, this is just textbook Zersetzung, the East German, tactic that's kind of the philosophical foundation for this terror. But, I never have really felt overtly threatened. The worst part has always been just the electromagnetic torture. They've poisoned me with parasite eggs and other drugs before. But the worst part is the electromagnetic torture. So that, and everyone who's experienced organized stalking odds work, they know how it's kind of very discreet, because that's how this system survives, and that's how they do it on a high-volume basis. So, I didn't fear any more for my safety than I did any other time. And I've gone on solo hiking trips before. So, and there's the people out there are really kind and really friendly. So, but you always want to take precautions when you're camping by yourself, I wouldn't recommend any more precautions, but, you kind of caveat emptor. Like I'd say the same thing to you if you're asking me about camping anywhere, you want people to know where you are, your family members, know how long you're going to be there, and, when you're going to check back in, and, just have, rain gear and have, you always bring like a knife just so, you can, that's just a common camping tool. And I brought some mace as well. There's bears in the area, but I checked in with a park ranger before I started camping, and she says, there's never been any, or from what she said, there's never been any violent attacks of bears. She's heard about campers getting their food or having their food attract them if they stay in the same place for a long time. But, these aren't the big grizzlies from Alaska. So, enter at your own risk, but I didn't feel any more unsafe there than I felt in any other city. I felt a lot more unsafe coming back, because just the electromagnetic torture started ramping back up. And just basic precautions that you take if you're camping anywhere by yourself.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I'm sure that
it's a civilian facility, the Green Bank telescopes are. The Sugar Grove facility, which is, at least 30 miles away, still in the radio quiet zone, and half of it's been sold off, and the other part, a major part of it's been sold off because they discontinued the community there. But, according to Wikipedia, and, you can see on Google satellite imagery, they have, another big, antenna base, an eavesdropping base, an underground facility about 2 miles outside of Sugar Grove. This is the NSA, and that's still operational according to, sources I've read. So, I didn't hike in that area, and, it's, we're not criminals, we're actually, the most patriotic people out there by, risking our lives and, powering through all this, violence that's being inflicted upon us by exposing these crimes. So, I'm not, I admire most of law enforcement, and I'm not ashamed of what I'm doing. I encourage everyone to talk about it, but, in a smart way. But, if you don't want to talk about it, you can say, another truth, like you're researching electromagnetic radiation, or you're a citizen journalist, a citizen scientist. I was never killed. Everyone in town was nice that I dealt with on an official basis. They seem like good people in the area. There's nice little bed and breakfasts and hotels and country kitchens and things like that all around. And the town of Marlinton is this cool little community, maybe 1,000, 2,000 people. Has a lot of trendy, some trendy coffee shops, not a lot, and restaurants. So that was cool. The precautions you take if you're camping anywhere. And the Green Bank Telescope facility is a civilian facility. They're very nice and welcoming there. You aren't doing anything weird or illegal by hiking up there. It's national forest land. That's why it exists, for the citizens of this of this country to have, some pristine nature to enjoy. So just take the precautions you take if you're camping anywhere by yourself.
Okay, well, thank you, Spencer. I'm going to open up the floor. I know there's some questions, and this is very promising information that you've shared with us. So in just a moment, I come to Central Colorado, so please be ready. Hi, Central Colorado.
Hi, Ella. I had a question earlier, but not for this guest, so I just want to thank him for providing all that information for right now.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Ella.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Georgia. They might have had their hand up a bit, too. Hi, Georgia. Do you have a question for Spencer? Okay. Georgia, I'm going to go ahead and mute you, and then if you do have a question, just start it again, and I'll come back to you. Come on. Okay, so I see, I'm going to come to Florida. Florida, be ready, please. Here we go.
Hello, Spencer.
Hi.
Hi. I'm so thrilled that you join our calls and everything. I think you're a very knowledgeable guy, and I've been a very big help with all of us. I've got a question about. It's been established the V2K is satellite, but the ground-based weapons are those primarily? Do they have to be more local, or can they still be projected from, or however they do it? I guess what I'm asking is, I've heard a lot of people that have moved from state to state and are still hit. But what I'm wondering is, are the ground-based weapons, like the electronic weapons, do they have to be local, or can they still do it by satellite?
Anything's possible, and the electromagnetics revolution has just really miniaturized all these devices. I've done research on lasers, and lasers can be as small as grains of salt. They can be hidden or embedded anywhere. And they're talking about, our Samsung TVs having spy devices in them. It's very likely that, a lot of our appliances and electronics have this stuff built into them by the manufacturer. And even our automobiles and, most likely a lot of systems on our electric grid, our Wi-Fi routers, and, I'm sure maybe satellites play a role in relaying this data. Electromagnetic waves travel at the speed of light, so they can be in a command center, in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., or in Southern California, or in the big, expansive bases of Nevada, and they can control that stuff from there at the speed of light. We put a man on the moon back in the 60s, and we were controlling electronic equipment on the moon 250,000 miles away from a command center in Houston. So, we were moving around, lunar rovers from Houston 250,000 miles away. So, this, and as you said, it's ubiquitous at this point. So this stuff has got to be going into everyday electronics and most likely our automobiles. Because you talk to a mechanic, they tell you that all cars are computerized. They're a mystery to most of them, and most Americans. If you ask anyone, myself included, could you build a flat screen television like the ones we all have in our homes, or could you repair one? I don't think 0.001% maybe could do it, and so it's just widespread ignorance. And it's not because Americans are stupid. We took man to the moon in the 60s. We created the modern world. We created the dot-com boom. Americans are great, smart people. We're just told that we're bad at math or science to, in my opinion, discourage us from, learning about the modern world. And because knowledge is power, and these, oligarchs and their cronies in the deep state, at the higher bureaucratic levels, don't want, this information to be part of the consensus reality. And, the billionaires that own your mainstream media station, they get no benefit from talking about it. So they'll just cover unnewsworthy items, that, just distract from the real crimes and tragedies going on in this country. And, we've even have hard proof that, all these spy agencies are, putting back doors in all our software and communication companies and illegally spying on Americans with them. So it's no stretch of the imagination to, conclude that they're doing this with hardware manufacturers as well. General Petraeus implied as much. There's a naval veteran named Wayne Madsen who wrote a book on this. It's a big, thick book talking about all the companies that served as CIA front companies and had ties to them. And you do research on companies like Scientific Atlanta and how they rolled into Cisco. And you go back and you can find some interesting information on Scientific Atlanta. I was reading about them in a book called The Wizards of Langley, which is where the CIA headquarters are. And Scientific Atlanta was one of their largest spy equipment manufacturers. They were putting up all the eavesdropping and spy equipment to spy on Iran in this book it was talking about. This is a well-regarded mainstream book. And then what's Scientific Atlanta doing 20 years later? They're building all the cable boxes that are going into our home in, throughout the 90s. And in some markets, 100% of the cable boxes would be Scientific Atlanta, and it's been purchased by Cisco now. So, we just have a hard time grasping, all the things that can be accomplished by the deep state or military-industrial complex or whatever you want to call it, just because they have such a massive army of people and their budgets are so massive and they dedicate just thousands upon thousands of people to doing this full time. The DARPA had the internet back in the late 60s. When did the civilian community really get to know about it? What, the 90s? When did people start adopting it on a widespread basis? The early 2000s? But it's just, you could say the same about a lot of technology, the Manhattan Project, all the people that worked on that, there's no mention of that in the newspaper. No, people didn't know about it until the bomb dropped, literally. So these secrets can be kept, and amazing things can be accomplished that are incomprehensible almost due to their manpower and budgets.
Yeah, like I'm saying, I was just wondering because even in the car, they've attacked me in the car with their, I don't even know what exact weapon it would be used, microwave or whatever. I know the radio frequency is what they hit my eyes with. But as far as causing harm or causing pain in my private area or my legs, I've had that in the car driving, and I'm wondering, obviously it seems to be a way that they can connect with a more powerful engine or motor running or something. They can connect with the electrical components, because I can be driving. They had me in tears driving to work, and I ended up having to see the doctor. I was hurting so bad. I was in so much pain.
Yeah, we've all experienced that. I get that nonstop, in cars, wherever. And it's, it doesn't work exactly like it works with your cell phones, but, you can be driving down the road at 80 miles per hour, getting high-speed data, watching videos, making calls on your cell phone, all sorts of different packets and data and analog and digital signals, maintaining perfect continuity during your whole drive down the interstate at 80 miles or 70 miles an hour, whatever the speed limit is. That is, what electronic devices are capable of. Obviously the humans are a little different. They got to use different frequencies and methodology, but, they've been working on this stuff and rolling it out for so long, and it's become so miniaturized, and there's no one auditing these systems, and no one really understands this technology anymore and knows how to repair it or audit it or build it, that, this stuff is going in to all our devices. There's scientific studies that state, what frequencies and what power levels and what modulations can cause these symptoms in humans. And
I'm thinking about, even in detail, what power would they need at what distance from the target
there are many different possibilities
to get the effect that they want, because I think we can even narrow down where the perps are if we knew, if we had a perimeter to look at as far as the distance and the power needed to apply the weapon effectively. So we can narrow down even in an area of a target.
You just got to understand, tens of thousands at least of people have been working on this full time for decades, and they've had trillions of dollars at their, available to them, and it's all been, hidden legally under the classification laws. And, you look at the official MKUltra documents going back to 1960, they admitted they started studying electromagnetic radiation on humans, Paul Cell, Subproject 119. And, if you read a book by, say, Colin Ross, he's a psychiatrist, he has a great book that's, entirely factually based, all, written based on source material from congressional hearings and MKUltra FOIA documents. The kind of limited hangout surrounding that is that it's, about poisoning people with LSD against their will. No, it was primarily a behavioral and mind control program. They developed all these tactics that they're using on us now remotely with electromagnetic weapons, but they did it to people, that they had to, have, confined back then or, nearby. So, it's incredible, who all took place in this. Something like 80 research institutions and universities. That's a insanely large number. General Motors even was involved in MKUltra. They developed a biomedical division, and unfortunately, a lot of the documents pertaining to what General Motors did were never released. What have they got to hide? Well, obviously something big and bad. If they aren't declassifying these documents 50 years later, and they say 99% of them were destroyed, but they found a few. Anyways, why would General Motors need a biomedical division that's partaking in MKUltra? It's because, if you study the microelectronics revolution, these devices are going into, these electromagnetic weapons are so miniaturized that they can be put in anything. And so, in answer to your question, there's a ton of scientific studies out there, just showing what frequencies and what power levels can cause this pain in humans. And it's complex. It's really complex. But you know what? If you look at the circuit board in your flat screen television, that's pretty complex too. So these things can be accomplished when you have tens of thousands of people working behind a legal veil of secrecy with pretty much unlimited budgets over the course of 50 years. That's how this has become so ubiquitous. That's why, the people they target, rarely, escape it, and until, they're finished with them for whatever evil purpose they have, So, General Motors was in MKUltra. They had a biomedical program. Why does a car manufacturer have a biomedical program? I think we all know why. So it's everywhere at this point because the microelectronics revolution has enabled these devices to be deployed everywhere. And it's simple to detect. You need a spectrum analyzer. That's what you need. And it's well within the wheelhouse of, all our military and intelligence and law enforcement agencies. And they have the budgets to do it. And fighting terrorism is the number one goal in this country. And hundreds of thousands of people are being terrorized. So this should be priority number one. But, it's repressed and the victims are attacked and discredited violently. And, and it's so simple to solve. All they need to do is, burst out a spectrum analyzer. And then once one jurisdiction finds out these crimes are going on, it'll set a precedent for the entire world. And there will no longer be plausible deniability. There will be no longer the old Soviet tactic of psychiatric reprisal to discredit your victims. That will all disappear overnight once they just get this empirical evidence that's just sitting there waiting for us. That they just need to properly run spectrum analyzer with a qualified engineer, just so everything's copacetic. And there's plenty of different routes they have to attack us.
Okay. Well, thank you, Spencer. So we have quite a few people in line with questions here, so try to have short questions. And let me go ahead and go to California. Hi, California. I'm coming to you. California? Okay.
Ella.
Hold on 1 second. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Ella. They did something to wipe my brain out. They did something to wake my brain up. And this is like the third time that they've done it, and then they put horrible things in my brain. I don't even know how to explain it. I am so afraid. These people are doing these experimental things about how to wipe a person out and make them into a different person, a completely different person, by wiping out their memory and their behavior and everything. And they just did it to me. They just did it to me again. This and the last time I never got my memory back. I mean, my long-term memory back. It never came back after the last time. And I am so afraid. And they're putting all this heinous and really sick energy into me. I mean, like sick, rapist, perversion energy into me and pictures into my head. If I could have, I've been trying to suicide out and I can't suicide out. They won't let me suicide to get away from it. It's so bad. My sister's trying to suicide too because they're doing the same thing to her. If I had known, believe me, if I had known that they would do things like this to me, I would have suicided out a long time ago. I would never have wanted to live this way. I would never have wanted people to do this to me. There are really, really sick gang stalkers out there, really, really sick, perverted, and they're trying to pervert everything about God and pervert everything about sex and pervert all these things in me and make me scream and yell. It's so bad. I know nobody knows what to do to help me. I mainly want people to know there's really, really bad things that they can do with us. And whatever this thing is that wipes your brain out, it's horrible. It's the most horrible thing to go through when they do it. It's like your whole brain just goes on fire in your eyes. Something horrible goes in your eyes. Something horrible gets put through your eyes, like a demon energy or something. It's horrible. I don't feel okay at all. I can't. I'm fighting whatever it is that they put in me.
Okay, let's just stay on the call. Let me put you on hold just for a little bit, okay? And then we'll just take more questions, and then we'll open up the call, and there'll be a late night call, and you can talk there. I'm really, really, really sorry. So many of us are worried about you, and so many of us feel for you. I wish there was something we could do, but would that be okay?
No, it's okay. It just happened, and I'm so scared. I'm just so scared. My sister is so scared, too. We're so scared at what they're doing.
I'm sorry. Well, hang in there, Linda, okay? And don't hang up, okay?
Okay, thank you, Ella.
Yeah, sorry you're going through that. A lot of people are being tortured like that. It's tough, I know. Just do what you can. Get in bed, get under your covers, and, just remind yourself of your values and what's going on. It's basically kind of like a Soviet-style purge, just a gulag system, and they're, doing all sorts of things to people. A common tactic is creating a dissociative identity disorder. Trauma-based torture can do that. And you tie it in with Pavlovian conditioning, and this was all studied during MKUltra for decades. And now it's being applied remotely. And it's because they have no oversight. It's sick that they do it to citizens of their own country, but secret societies and these spy agencies have a history and well-developed tactics to do this stuff. So, just try to tune it out. Try to, just realize that, these are criminals doing this to you. They're doing it to a lot of people. Just try to deprogram yourself that they're trying to, condition you with any of the images or the torture, and put on some music, some classical music without any words, and we're doing our best to expose this, but it's it's a big hurdle to overcome for a lot of activists, and you can study a lot of advocacy campaigns that ended up being successful in the past, and this is what they go through. So sorry, and I hope you feel better.
And don't forget to breathe deeply. Okay, so I'm going to go to California. I'm coming to you next, another California. Hi, California.
Hi, this is Kathleen Larson. Hi, Ella. Hi, Spencer.
Hi.
Hi. You know that when you describe the relief and the pressure leaving you, I felt that when it must have been switching something out, and I thought, oh, this is what it's like, and it is coming. And that poor woman, oh my God! But I have a question for you, and that is, you described one time that you had you could hear like a truck outside your window over fans and everything else. And do you think that was a generator?
When I heard what?
You said one time on a call that you could hear like a truck idling outside your window over fans, over everything. And do you think that was a generator? I think they need a generator to do a lot of this stuff in the people that are less sophisticated.
I'd have to get a little more context, but as far as the technology goes, I mean, it's all classified, but the science is there. That's the important part. The science is there. The acknowledgments by official medical bodies are there that electromagnetic weapons cause these problems in humans. So there's no excuse why not to detect it. That's what matters. That's the important part.
Right, it does matter, but
and
I
they
just
have
wondered
technical capabilities to detect it with a spectrum analyzer. So that's what matters.
Yeah, no question. And but I just wondered because I remember you talking about that sound, and I have proven the microwaves in court, but I didn't get him for the restraining order because I couldn't prove that he had a generator. And so that's why I'm asking. And my guy, he is a ham operator. And for people who want to know about their, they can download a spectrum analyzer. It's digital, and obviously, to get the whole country as well, it'll have to be a really expensive one. But they can download one for $1, and you can download an acoustic one. And that's just go to Google Play Store, and then go to Amazon.com. You can get like an acoustic one for $6.99. And you can tell where your perps are coming from. And you know how you were talking about Samsung? Well, my doctor heard about somebody told her that her phone, that all the Samsung phones had a chip in them. She took the back of hers out, and voila, there it was. So you are absolutely correct in that. And as far as the auto cars, 60 Minutes had a whole segment on how the new cars have 25 to 50 computers in them and that they can remotely control them. They had a whole segment on that. So that, too, is already proven and out there. So
yeah, I shouldn't pick on Samsung. I think this stuff is, we can safely conclude it's going into a lot of our TVs. There's been credible reports of it going into our cable box when Scientific Atlanta, the big spy contractor for the CIA, going back to the 70s, rolled out cable boxes into all our homes. I mean, just beyond the comprehension of most targeted individuals, because, most of us and most Americans and most people of the world don't have a background in electromagnetism and radio frequency engineering and microelectronics. But if you study, the declassified programs and the science going back to the 60s even, they were doing incredible things. Like, draw the analogy between a drone flying over Afghanistan. What happens? The drone picks up, the multispectral data it's scanning on the ground, or the radar data, the TSAR data, the hyperspectral imaging, whatever it's running to, gain, just a full picture of the entire landscape that can, get the spectral fingerprint and pick up light bands far outside the visible range to, determine what's below and what's below the ground. And it relays it back to a satellite, and the satellite relays it to another satellite, and that satellite relays it down to a control center in
Tampa, Florida, CENTCOM. We're basically kind of organic drones. So, one can only conclude that these devices, just based on a lot of evidence that you got to piece together, depend on a lot of redundancy, and that they depend on a lot of relays to, get back to the command center, which is likely not even anywhere near your center, near your home. Like, you've got to just remember there are 5 million people with security clearances in this country. The vast majority are good, admirable people. But, what's been proven over and over is that criminal cliques can form. This has been proven in Iran-Contra. This has been proven in MK-Ultra when Nazi concentration camp torture was carried out against countless innocent Americans. How the organizations that did this are still around, I don't know. I think,
exactly.
So the possibilities are endless, just because, criminal elements within these organizations. We need an intelligence community. We need a military, but, they need to be reformed and, reformed in a lot of ways. And they need much more oversight.
Look at the patents. All you have to do is look at the patents, and you can see how far they've come.
Yeah, there's overwhelming evidence, and if you want, absolutely just the cherry on the cake, get a spectrum analyzer out here, but it's just what the same thing the civil rights marchers were going up against are the same people who are telling, the community that asbestos causes mesothelioma. For years or decades they were ignored. What they said to people who were dying from asbestos exposure? They said, you get mesothelioma from digging in your garden. So that's basically like saying you get it from going outside, or, it's just what they do to TIs now. But, there's a way to prove this, and, there's lots of ways to prove this. We have evidence in many, many categories: the patent, the scientific studies, the, FOIA documents, the whistleblower claims, just countless amounts. And, there's an easy way to prove us wrong. Get a spectrum analyzer, have it tuned properly, have a proper person, running it, and spend some time doing it. We've got millions of people in this country in the military-industrial complex, or deep state, whatever you want to call it, and they get hundreds of billions a year. It's well within their budgets, and it's well within their knowledge base. Out of that pool of people, I'm sure they can find thousands of people who can do this. And, society needs to know that, the number of victims of this Soviet-style purge are increasing exponentially. And, that being quiet isn't going to save your skin, because if these people that'll kill innocent people, they aren't going to reward your loyalty with anything. They have no souls. So, we're doing a favor to mankind, and hopefully we'll save ourselves by getting this tyranny exposed and shut down.
Exactly. Well, listen, and please keep, making inroads on the class action, because that's really, really important. And thank you so much. And thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Ella, for having him on. So I'll stop talking. Take care.
Thanks. I'll go ahead and put you back on hold. I'm going to come back up to another California. Hi, California.
Yeah, this is me, Ella.
Oh, okay. Let me go ahead and put you back on hold.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Central Minnesota. The number is obviously not correct on here. Central Minnesota.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. Okay. He mentioned something about that they had poisoned him before, and I was wondering how he came to know that, and what it was exactly that they used.
I've gotten take-home drug tests, especially in the earlier stages of gang stalking. When, they're just trying to scare you into isolation by really putting on the pressure with gang stalking before they crank up the electromagnetic torture and
the conditioning and trainment and all that crap.
Yeah.
Where I urine stick, and I got like followed. This was hardcore gang stalking back then, and it showed positive for drugs I've never done in my life. So that's one example. Another example is they're constantly threatening me with this thing called salting, and that's where they poison your food with parasite eggs. And I've researched this. And organized crime has used this. It comes from Asian organized crime. It's a tactic they've used to terrorize and subjugate people going back 500 years, I believe. And so I researched parasite eggs, and they can survive in the open air for months, and stay active. And so they hide them in salt shakers. That's kind of the implication and the threat. And there's some felon working at the restaurant, or some person that they've corrupted and tortured with an electromagnetic weapon that gets a cue to salt, quote unquote, the person's food when they get the proper cue. And I've experienced the symptoms of it, and I've seen the parasites in my stool, both live and dead. And doctors have agreed with that, and they prescribed me parasite medicine. And at the time, I didn't have insurance. And you know how much the parasite medicine cost? $20,000 a month. I have insurance now, and I found natural cleanses. Just with natural organic products that aren't anything hardcore, like coconut oil and garlic and cayenne, things like that. Oregano oil is a good one. So those are two things I can say conclusively. I've read a lot of articles on smart dust and magnetic particles in the air. So, there's tons of ways, and I've studied, the MK Ultra documents, and, they've studied ways to deliver chemicals with aerosols, with, DMSO. DMSO is basically the ingredient in, say, like a nicotine patch that allows the nicotine to go through your skin. So instead of mixing nicotine with DMSO, they can mix in whatever drug they want that helps them with their scanning of your brain and tracking and making you more just visible. So I can I have conclusive evidence on the parasites and the druggings, but there's since the 60s, they've, developed designer drugs and, delivery systems such as aerosol sprays, droplets, and DMSO, which is, you can Google that. That's mainstream, or some kind of chemical equivalent to that makes the drug transdermal, and they can apply that to a lot of things. And then, they can capture your brain waves in that state and, kind of recreate the feeling. It's not always an overlay, as that's referred to. Their poisonings definitely have happened, and I've seen it and gained proof of that.
Yeah, I think it's the overlay thing. I mean, like on a daily basis, I feel like there's so much stuff coming out of my vents, my air, my ductwork. I don't know how they're getting in my ventilation system, but it's like there's like this, haze in the air and this powder everywhere, and I feel like it's in my water, in my air, in my food, everything. And I don't know how to, stop it. I don't know if they're in my attic or what, but.
Yeah, I mean, it all kind of hinges on their ability to track us, and any person, even people who aren't aware of it, or I mean, you like I mentioned this autobiography by Ben Rich, the Lockheed Skunk Works chief, head honcho. He talks about, just radar's tracking capabilities. Back, decades ago, they could track a baseball from thousands of miles away. They could track an ant. It's amazing how far and how advanced the technology is. I think the military technology is 50 years ahead of the civilian technology.
Yeah. I mean, I just hate the thought of breathing this in all the time. And I have 2 small dogs that are breathing it in too, and I mean, there's got to be a way to shut them out of my ventilation system.
It's very possible, but there's so many different ways that they've studied, and they admit to studying for decades. We're finding high levels of aluminum and barium in our soil these days, and they've admitted to spraying communities. There's a mainstream news report that you can find on YouTube about the branch of the military admitting to spraying communities with chemicals.
Yeah, it's been really
anything
bad.
is possible,
Really bad.
Anything's possible. And barium, which we're finding in our soil. You know what barium is? If you ever go to get a CAT scan, they have you drink barium because it makes your organs more contrastable. If you, it makes radiology and imaging, more effective. So, and they've admitted to doing this stuff before. So, I can't say definitively, but I can say definitively, that I have a history of doing this stuff, and it's likely being done to you. And a lot of people being sprayed or drugged a lot of times. Then they'll torment you with that and make you think it's happening with an overlay, even after because it's happened once and you gained evidence of it. And to test for any chemicals or any designer drugs they're getting into your system through aerosols, drops, or DMSO. You've got to, have a laboratory at your disposal. It's not like the movies where a team of FBI agents are going to burst in and test for this stuff. So, I'm not going to I'm not going to really speculate and say something definitively, but you just have to study what they've done historically. And, so a lot of things are possible because of the numbers of people being victimized.
My water smells like bleach is in it a lot of times, I think, but it's lots of fun.
Yeah,
I have one other question. You were talking about how, if they hack a vehicle, that the part that you should be looking for would be just the size of small as a grain of salt. Is that really, would that be the magnetron then? Or what do you look for?
I've just researched, I read a book on lasers. It was from a decade or two ago, and the lasers they were developing were the sizes of grains of salt. I've done research, and you see universities, they're developing phased array laser chips that are the size of raisins. And phased array laser chip is what allows the directed energy to be highly focused. And when the phased array chips in the civilian sector, this article was from 2007. I forget the research institute, but when the phased array chips that allow, when you shine a flashlight at the wall, you see the beam, and when you step back from the wall, the beam gets bigger. The flashlight dot on the wall gets bigger. That's called blooming, and that's blooming of electromagnetic radiation in the visible light spectrum. Blooming is a problem in the spectrums we can't see, and they overcome that with a phased array laser. And it just leads you to nothing but the conclusion that this stuff is very, very small. So the possibilities are endless, and it's because they can do this to people continuously, even when they're driving down the road in different states. And you just look at the MK Ultra documents, and you see that GM was working with the CIA in this massive program, starting at least a couple decades ago with a biomedical division. Why did General Motors, a car maker, have a biomedical division?
Well, I'm telling you that in Minnesota right now, I'm serious. It seems like there's a majority of people on the road that have vehicles equipped with this stuff, and they set it off with like a blinker or their hazard lights or whatever, because I have like a detector. And
they could set off a lunar rover on the moon 250,000 miles away in the 1960s. That's just a fact, okay? So here we are 50 years later, and they aren't on the moon. I can pretty much say that for sure, unless I don't know why they would build a base on the moon to carry out this TI program. They're likely in the D.C. suburbs or Southern California or the Nevada desert, from what I can tell, because that's where most of this infrastructure is, most of the deep state infrastructure. And so it travels at the speed of light. So the vehicle operator doesn't need to do anything. That stuff can be controlled and relayed at the speed of light, which is faster than any human can notice when you're dealing with just an expanse of a few hundred or a few thousand miles.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure. I mean, these people race to get right in front of me and then put their brake lights on and their blinkers on, and it's just every other vehicle. I mean, I just can't get over how many people are involved in this.
I mean, when they were developing these technologies, at first they needed more interaction with the people. They needed to kidnap them or abduct them or bring them into, their laboratories, in the 70s and 80s. And they came up with the alien cover story back then to make the victims sound discredited. Now they just do misdirection, so they make one, they trigger one TI to go outside whenever their neighbor's been triggered to go outside with an artificial image or an artificial urge. And, there's so many different ways that they can make it appear like it's, the guy in, the BMW chasing you around, or the guy in the Ford truck chasing you around, or your neighbor who's just doesn't really know what's going on. Maybe it's possible that some of your neighbors are knowingly, aware that this stuff has been built into their television sets or cars, but, it's not necessary, and it would be a risk for them to, have so many people in the field deploying this stuff, knowingly. So, I mean, anything's possible, and, that's not really the main argument that we have to overcome. We just have to overcome the glaring, just refusal of, our authorities to just do something sensible, like set up a spectrum analyzer. And, we've got evidence in so many categories, it's not necessary to explain all the technology. You hand me the keys to the, various spy agencies, and I'll go tell you exactly what their technologies are. But, there's plenty of scientific studies and there's plenty of civilian research to show that these weapons cause these problems and that they've been miniaturized, and the agencies have a history of doing this for decades. There's plenty of FOIA releases, plenty of admissions, plenty of congressional hearings where all this type of stuff's been admitted to going back decades, and there's plenty of whistleblowers and scientific studies going up to the present day, from the military, legal community, wherever, spy community, all saying this is happening. It's just, the media just won't cover it, and it's because, the billionaires that own it, they just don't care about us.
And I think the general public is being brainwashed by these cell towers into just ignoring us, or like changing the subject whenever it's brought up, or it's like they're mind controlled. Just like people that care about me and love me just can't seem to even talk about it for a minute. They're all programmed. It's so scary.
I mean, billions of cell phones are out there, and they're all tracked, and they all get high-speed data, whether analog or digital, or whether it's you're watching a YouTube video driving down the road, or hopefully you're not driving, but you know what I mean. I mean, it's called a complex system. If you told someone about an iPhone and all its capabilities 100 years ago, they'd call you crazy. And, humans aren't cell phones, but we are electromagnetic beings, and it's conclusively proven that electromagnetic weapons can affect all of our biological systems. And you know what? They've studied it. They've admitted to studying it. Countless credible victims are saying they're being tortured with it. Whistleblowers from the agencies are saying that they've deployed it. And so it's there. Our case is made. We just need to get organized enough. And you know what? We could add, we can only build upon what we have now.
we have to find someone who will listen and act, That's the hard part.
Well, you study advocacy campaigns in the past, the people who got asbestos banned, the people who blew the whistle on Bernie Madoff, the people who got tobacco banned, the people who said, there's invisible bacteria on your medical tools, you need to start sterilizing them. The civil rights marchers, it was all, a gross injustice. It was all an atrocity. So you can't despair. You can't let your emotions take hold of you. You've got to maintain rational, steadfast, peaceful, legal activism.
It's so hard to do
history shows that you succeed. But it is hard because we're basically in an invisible gulag. We're being tortured while we're carrying out this activism. So, but you just got to, take a historical perspective and realize that people have, overcome these atrocities in the past for peaceful legal activism. And we'll do the same.
I wish there was like a headquarters for us where we could, just like a safe place to go and where we could all kind of get together. I don't know, I just feel so like going it alone, but.
Well, there's long-established tactics in various spy agencies of disrupting whole governments and countries because the newly elected leader isn't, aligned with the ideals of criminal elements within the military-industrial complex or various oligarchs in our country. So, that's, when they apply those tactics to a TI organization like FFCHS, they have experience doing this to governments of entire countries, and that's fine. They say they're not democratic or they're doing these terrible things. You know what? I won't go into that. I still think the majority of members of our government are good. But there are corrupt people at the top and, scattered throughout that are a minority, and there are circles within circles, and this has been proven time and time again. MK Ultra, that was, a black program, and this is the same thing. This is basically an illegal continuation of it. It's, it's a crime against humanity. It's a purge. It's these experiments merged into crimes a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate everything that you've been contributing. And this is the first time I've been able to talk to another human being who actually can relate, and it's nice to be able to do this. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the kind words.
Okay.
I'm glad to be here.
I'm going to go to 657. Hi, 657.
Hi, it's Cece. How's everybody tonight? My phone is actually running out of torch here. I'm running into my, not running really, but going into my bedroom to get the other phone. So if it disconnects me, you'll know why. I had a question. In this, I missed the beginning part of Spencer's talk. I'd like to know, is there property for sale in this no-go or this no? Darn it. Hold on. Okay. Got the good phone.
Yeah, I heard your question. There is the closest two towns to Greenbank that are remote and have easy access to the wilderness are a town called Hosterman. It's just west of Greenbank, and there's a town called Wanless. And that's an interesting name, WANLESS. You know what Wanless? You know what a WAN is? We have LANs, LANs, local area networks. We have, WANs, wide area networks, which would be basically, a local area network would be like your wireless router. A wide area network would be the cell phone grid. And so they named this town Wanless. I'd like to see the history of it if it came about before or after the radio quiet zone was established. But those are two towns nearby that sell property.
How nearby are they?
They are like at the foot of the trail, so they're about 2 miles from the ridge that overlooks the telescopes. And, I've noticed it diminishing there, but you're still around, cars and electronics, many devices where it's possible to hide electromagnetic weapons or embed them. It's no different than them establishing a relationship with the data and software companies to embed backdoors in them. And there's, a lot of whistleblowers talking about how they do the same thing with hardware companies. So that's how this stuff is happening. So, they're right near, they're in probably zone 3 or 2, very close to the quiet zone and within walking distance. Or they're in the quiet zone, in the heart of the quiet zone, but very close to the restrictive fly zone and very close to the most restrictive part of the radio quiet zone. And then, if you want a somewhat larger city, there's Cass, which is a historical logging town. So I don't know if there's much property for sale there. Marlinton, though, it's actually a community. It's got some neat restaurants and it's close to everything. You can get land and houses there. There's a lot for sale, especially the logging industry in the area has kind of declined. The populations remain stagnant, so you can buy property around there. But Wanlis and Hosterman, if you really want to get close, it might be something to look into. I plan to go back sometime in the near future, within a few weeks or a few months, and explore more and gain a little more relief. It's a great area.
Do you think it behooves one to go there and move? I mean, if we're being tortured with this stuff, it's awful. So
I mean, there's real estate agents in the area. I know I grabbed the card, but you can probably find them online just by searching in that vicinity. I'll try to get you the names of some, but I mean, you can probably find them with a quick search engine query. So those would be the people to talk to, and I don't think it's that expensive to get property up there. But, in the meantime, you might just want to take a vacation there and go hiking along that ridge, 701 Allegheny Trail, based out of Hosterman or Wanlis. Just park there, and there's areas you can park. Probably Wanlis might be easiest unless you have a truck, and Hosterman's a little more remote.
The other day I was on Derek's call, and I had gone to Wikipedia and looked up the no radio or National Radio Quiet Zone, and it said it was established in 1958, and today the establishment day has been wiped out. Isn't that interesting? At least I don't see it here.
Oh wow! So they removed from Wikipedia when the radio the sentence that contains when it was founded.
Maybe I'm looking up a different Wikipedia National Radio Quiet Zone area, but it says here the National Radio Quiet Zone is a large area of land in the United States designated as Radio Quiet Zone, in which radio transmissions are heavily restricted by law to facilitate scientific research and military intelligence. It is located in the states of West Virginia, and a small part of Maryland. But on Monday it said it was established in 1958, and today it doesn't have any date. It doesn't show the year, and I'm just I don't know. That sounds awfully weird to me. I'm gonna try it once more. National Radio Quiet Zone. National Radio Quiet Zone. Look it up and see if.
Well, Wikipedia, as you know, is a peer-created encyclopedia. There's usually a lot of people monitoring each article, but sometimes, organizations that have a lot of financial backing can hire groups of bullies to edit it to their liking. So, especially, a lot of articles can be slanted, and often are, but, usually the community, especially if it's a hard fact, like when something was established that you can prove with a primary source, the community would jump on that. So I don't know what the incentive would be for them or for anyone to remove the date from that article.
They removed it. It's
revision history. There's a tab that shows revision history that anyone can see, even if you aren't a Wikipedia creator, that it's not very prominent, that you can find revision history on the page somewhere to see if the article's been tampered with recently.
Read, edit.
But I can't really, off the top of my head, I can't think of any incentive anyone would have for removing that date. But that, I don't know, it's an interesting fact. It's true. I'm not doubting you, but you got to look at the revision data, and you could be
let me
anywhere in your computer. I don't know, but I'll check it out later. But I don't know what the incentive would be for removing that date by anyone.
Nor would I. I just think it's maybe because it shows planning. Maybe it's because it shows premeditated planning. My thoughts, I read it right off the page on Derek's phone call on Monday, which was yesterday, and today it is gone. The date of establishment is gone. Now, I just went to another page, and it's the BBC.com, and it says there the Quiet Zone was established in 1958.
Yeah, so I don't know why that
I'm saying is
been removed from the Wikipedia article. I checked the revision data, but I can't think of any conclusions to draw from that off the top of my head, because that fact's well established and you can find it in other sources. So I don't know
why they would have
what anyone would gain by removing that or hiding that. And I'll take a look at it, though, and it's something that should be reversed. That's just basic facts, but I can't draw any conclusions or, make any statements based on that. I don't know.
Well, it's still Wikipedia, and I had never heard of it before she mentioned, or before I got Ella's email. And then, of course, on Derek's phone call, I just, because I sit in front of my computer, too, I just searched it, and, of course, Wikipedia comes up for most anything you search for. And I read it right off of what Wikipedia said, and now it's gone. The date is gone. But it is on this other, the BBC article. It does identify that it was established in 1958. So, interesting, though, huh? That's very interesting. Anyway, so it is possible then to possibly, if one wanted to move there, to buy land there, whether or not we'd escape targeting, that's another question. Anyway, I'm done, Ella. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, guys. Well, I'm going to have to need to get off the call here, so Ken is going to be nice enough and take over the call. So he has a different room number. He's on TalkShoe as well. And Spencer, I just want to say thank you for coming in. It's always a pleasure having you coming on, and you're one of the people I've known the longest in this community. So thanks for coming on and giving some hope. And everyone, really check it out. I'm glad it worked for you, and I'm glad you had some reprieve there. Always kind of check things out. Don't just pack up and move there. Of course, go out there and check it out or talk to other people who've been there. And but it is inspiring. It's nice to know that you had relief. So thank you. I appreciate it, Spencer. And so Ken has a call, and it's going to be going on right after my call. Kyle doesn't have internet at the moment, but he'll get his internet going hopefully within the week. But right now, Ken has a call at 142-298. Again, the number is 142-298, and it's the same TalkShoe number. So, sorry, guys, I'm not feeling too great. So I'm going to go ahead and end the call. Thanks, Spencer. Again, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I hope people learn a lot and consider taking at least a vacation to the area. It's a beautiful time of the year.
If anything, go take a nice vacation out in nature.
Definitely.
Okay. Thanks,
it's good
guys.
talking to you, Ella, and thanks again for having me on.
Okay. Bye-bye.
To recalibrate some of their systems now that I'm back in the urban area of Texas again. So I just, but, I want to tell people about this quiet zone because it's a pretty incredible place. Even from a non-TI perspective,
the telescopes, which is one of the primary reasons of the quiet zone, as you mentioned in the intro. The Green Bank telescopes are pretty incredible. They offer a tour of the facility, and they have a nice, walking map as well. And you really start to notice that the toolkits that the perpetrators have, they get limited. It seems like the deeper you get into the quiet zone. So I found that it diminished, the most when I was hiking nearest to the telescopes. Has anyone, or have you heard any other TIs talk about the quiet zone, the National Radio Quiet Zone?
No, I've never heard of. I've never even heard of it ever. I'm here on the West Coast, and I hadn't heard of it. How did you come to find it, and how did you hear about it? I'm just curious. I wanted to backtrack a little bit and figure out how you got.
I talked about it for a minute or two on Derek's recorded call. Well, not a minute or two. Actually, it stretched down. I wanted to get on and talk about it a minute or two, but it stretched down for a while. And this was on Saturday, and some of them had heard of it. I guess Derek, who's been in the community for a while, has heard of it, but he's been a TI activist for who knows how long, 10 years, I think. But most people hadn't. So I just wanted to give some background. I found out about it when a few links of TI friends on Facebook were going around, and they were talking about this town in Sugar Grove that was this self-sustained community in Sugar Grove, West Virginia, that operated under the Navy and the NSA as kind of an eavesdropping operation. And they were shutting it down and putting it up for sale back in 2015. And that's in it. The listing, that a couple TIs posted on their Facebook feed said it was in the middle of this place called the National Radio Quiet Zone, where electromagnetic emissions are heavily restricted. And so that immediately caught my eye. There were some jokes about, hey, we should pool our money and buy this town. I think it ended up selling for a few $1 million. So I don't know how far we would have gotten with that. But, I kept the National Radio Quiet Zone in the back of my mind. And, I had an opportunity to, take a break, these past few weeks and just, make the haul up to West Virginia. I've been kind of battered with electromagnetic weapon torture these past couple of months due to my activism and the class action lawsuit that I'm organizing. And, it's good in the sense that, when they torture you hard, it means you're doing something effective sometimes. And but on the downside, it stymies your progress. So I just needed a break, and I usually will just go camping every now and then, once or twice a year, in state parks or national parks near me, or national forests. I was in Boy Scouts for a while, but I didn't make it an Eagle Scout or anything. I switched to sports, but I kind of reignited my interest in the subject due to the fact that I was just trying out different ways to escape the electromagnetic torture. And I found that I get relief in the wilderness. The perps have a toolkit ranging from, just pain to V2K to artificial images, artificial dreams. Those can be the worst, just because they use all this like Pavlovian conditioning just to try to break you down, or to artificial emotions and just operant conditioning, where they're constantly trying to just carry out these conditioning techniques on you like it's an enslavement program. Just straight out of MK Ultra, but it's done remotely now. This is kind of the evolution and illegal continuation of MK Ultra. The experiments transformed into crimes a long time ago.
So, they have a range of tools they can use on you, and it's pretty ubiquitous these days. But, I would get a little relief in the wilderness, but, they would do this crazy thing. Military jets would start flying over 24/7 whenever I'm out in, like, a remote wilderness area hiking and camping. And it's just bizarre. That seems to be when the targeting comes back up, and then I'll start finding these little cues on the trail that have subjective meaning to me, or some like trigger word they were drilling into me, and I didn't know what it would mean. They'd say something like onion to me over and over again, and then I'd come across an onion on the trail. And, that's the last thing a backpacker would take in the wilderness. It's low nutritional value. It's fresh onion just sitting in the middle of the trail. Who put it there, and why? And why would you bring that out in the woods? Or, I was talking to a buddy about a tarp I had and wishing I'd brought it because I just had a lightweight version of, a water protector. And, I'd come across a tarp like a couple hours later that looks exactly like mine, that had no debris on it, like someone left it there. It was abandoned. And we'd hike back by the same spot a few hours later and it'd still be sitting there, just abandoned right on the trail, but brand new and like fresh with no leaves on top of it, debris, like someone just put it there. And this is the kind of stuff that starts happening once the jets fly over. And I found something similar in the quiet zone. I went to this area in the wilderness, probably about 20 miles from Green Bank.
Get there.
And
did you fly there, drive, or how did you get there?
I drove up there. It's pretty remote. Most airports, I talked to some locals, and I heard that there's an airport in Lewisburg, West Virginia, but it's a regional airport. I think Roanoke, Virginia has an international airport with regular flights, and Washington, D.C., and those are about those are closer to 3 hours away. There's Lewisburg, West Virginia, or there's Washington, D.C., and Roanoke, Virginia, but you'd have to rent a car if you went there. Lewisburg might be an option if they fly to your airport, Lewisburg, West Virginia. It's near the Greenbrier Resort, which is kind of a well-known resort on the East Coast. It's pretty cool. This old building that's got like an underground Cold War bunker where all the elites could go to an underground. I don't know what all was in it back in the day, but anyways. The closest town to Green Bank that has, like, Green Bank was West Virginia, where the National Radio Astronomy Observatory is located, and is in Green Bank, West Virginia, and its population is less than 200. The closest town with lodging, I'd say, is Cass, West Virginia. I believe that's about 10 miles away. And the closest town with lodging and a couple of restaurants where you see kind of,
Welcome to the Tuesday Night's Triumph Over Targeting podcast, and I'm your moderator, Ella. And tonight we have one of our favorite activists, Spencer Carter. He'll be talking here soon, but if you're new to the call, I just wanted to let you know that you can stay on, and we will get you some additional support, some additional TalkShoe podcast numbers, and some helpful links and websites. This is a solutions and educational-based podcast, but the views and opinions of my guests are not necessarily my own personal views and opinions. My goal is that everyone can obtain something out of tonight, especially feeling of empowerment. If you have any suggestions, comments, questions, or especially if you are in need of some additional support, please don't hesitate to email me at angel2016@gmail.com. So Spencer's going to be speaking for a while, and then when we get to the questions and answers of the interview, you can star 8, and when it's your turn, I will come to you, and you will hear a notification that you're being unmuted. So that's a prompt to let you know. And at that point, you will be able to ask your question, and then I will meet you after your question is completed. And if at any point in the call you're unmuted and you would like to mute yourself, have background noise or whatever, the case may be, just *6 to mute yourself, and then *6 to unmute yourself. So a little bit about Spencer. So Spencer will be talking about his recent trip to the National Radio Quiet Zone in West Virginia. The NRQZ is a large area of land in which electromagnetic emissions are greatly restricted, especially as you approach the radio telescopes of Green Bank, West Virginia, and the NSA Eavesdropping Operations Center of Sugar Grove, West Virginia. Spencer spent over a week hiking and camping in the Green Bank area, and the area is remote, but the good news is that he found places where his targeting diminished or disappeared. So he's here tonight to discuss the details, and we welcome him. And thanks, Spencer. It's nice to have you back on the call, and I'm glad you had such a nice experience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to share the details of the trip. It was a nice relief for the most part, although, the targeting's back, but it kind of seemed like they had to